Hello and welcome to this first module in the personal development programme here at Autism East Midlands as part of the Adult Hub. My name is Hannah Harris and I'm the founder of the Autistic Advantage, who are creating this programme for Autism East Midlands. It's really great to have you here. And to start with, I want to share that I myself am autistic. I have ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia and sensory processing difficulties. And for me, this program is an exceptional opportunity for autistic people to access information, support, guidance that unfortunately is not always there for us when we need it. Throughout this program, we're going to look at different topics, including some things you've potentially never heard of, and other things that are just about in the general ways in which we can manage life and provide strategies. It is so important to remember throughout this process that you are a unique individual. You can adapt, change, tweak anything that is shown to you here to suit you better. The idea of this is to support you to make sense of certain topics and concepts and to give you maybe different perspectives and to provide you with some strategies and ways that you can support yourself. As I'm going to talk to you today, for a very long time, I wasn't in a position, I didn't feel I was in a position to move my life forward. I was looking to others to do that for me. And actually through this process, we're going to show you how you can access some of that support, how you can advocate for yourself in different ways, and how you can implement some things that will help and support you in your life. So we start today with coping energy, and coping energy is all about developing our self-awareness and self-regulation skills. So without any further ado, I'm going to move on. So first of all, I want you to consider, have you ever found yourself thinking any of these statements? You know, as somebody, I'll be honest, once I gotten sort of past that resistance stage where I'd have been like, no, none of this applies to me. All of these apply to me. All of these would have applied to me prior to undergoing some work to deal with my self-awareness and my strategies and my coping energy. You know, things like I don't understand what causes me to be overwhelmed, to melt down or to shut down. You know, I can feel myself becoming overwhelmed, but I have no idea what to do about it. You know, it doesn't seem to matter what I do. I still feel overwhelmed, and I've definitely felt that. I've definitely felt that in the past. You know, I would have avoided or convinced myself that I didn't like to do certain activities because in the past it's been overwhelming. And I was definitely somebody that would have been like, I don't like people. And actually the reason that I didn't like people is because I didn't have good enough strategies to be able to navigate that. And that's something that I consciously still develop. You know, there's always another goal that I want to try and achieve. And that can be the same for you. Things don't have to come off the table because we're autistic. And sometimes when we don't have the strategies, we feel like, okay, well, we just can't do this and we just can't do that. We can probably do everything as long as we have our own unique ways of doing it. You know, and additionally, like that feeling of going from 0 to 100, you know, 1 minute I'm fine and the next I'm not. You know, all of these sorts of situations or situations similar can be supported through this knowledge and the use of coping energy. You know, for a long time, I was unable to keep myself regulated. I either avoided lots of things, even what I enjoyed doing, or I looked and relied on others and then got frustrated because they couldn't help me to be regulated. And at certain times, I felt that I was sure that individuals were trying to sabotage me, which was completely not the case. You know, there are some unkind individuals out there in the world, but most people want to help and support as best they can. You know, I had no idea what dysregulated me, what regulated me. I had no idea. I could throw a guess out, but whether it was accurate or not, I doubt. You know, if I didn't know that, how could they know that? They were guessing just as I did. And unfortunately, sometimes the guesswork that they may have done may have made the situation worse. So, you know, I'd never considered, and I'd said this earlier, I'd never considered that I could be responsible for my own regulation. And, you know, that I could make a difference to some of those feelings of anxiety and worry that I did feel. You know, for a long time, I felt those feelings were totally out of my control. And I kind of had come to accept that it was going to be an inevitable part of me. And that sounds really bad. But for me, I was diagnosed when I was 21. I'm now 26 at the time of this recording. But what I found and what I realized was when I was diagnosed, first I had this kind of honeymoon period where I felt like, you know, everything made sense for once. And I kind of understood it. And then very quickly after, I was kind of like, okay, so this is permanent and it's never going to change. And yes, my core difficulties are permanent, but I can always manage them and find different ways to work with them. And at that time, I'd never seen anybody do that, and I didn't know how to do it. You know, things like, well, Albert Einstein was this and such was that. It burned no strength to me, because I just wanted to get through a day without feeling overwhelmed and having a meltdown, or feeling just like I just couldn't do something, you know, something that I perceive to be really simple. You know, so the aim of this session is to this module is to understand how we can better recognize how different situations affect us and develop strategies to implement to reduce overwhelm, prevent meltdowns, prevent shutdowns, and to enable us to do the things we want to do. Fundamentally, we want to do the things that we want to do without feeling uneasy, dysregulated, and just not okay. Okay. And today we're going to do that through a concept that was created by the Autistic Advantage called coping energy. So what is coping energy? And some of you that may have started to think about it. You may have almost kind of created your own definition, because it is quite simple in its context. You know, it comes from the idea that every day we have situations that we need to cope with. And coping energy relates to our ability to cope with the demands of life, of the things that life puts onto us. It's the energy that we have to cope with that. It's not a numerical set. It's not a 3.4. It's not a 10 out of 10 or 2 out of 10. It doesn't have a concept like that. It relates to that energy. If you want to classify it in numerical terms, that is great for you. For me, I don't classify it in that way, but some people like to do that. You know, coping energy varies throughout the day. It varies from person to person, day to day, and it is based upon what we are experiencing and how we process and respond to different things. Fundamentally, when coping energy is lower, it is harder to cope. When we get to 0, we experience total overwhelm. And coping energy applies for everybody. It applies for absolutely everybody. But autistic people may experience their overwhelm as a meltdown or a shutdown. And that those things that are things that drain our coping energy could be different to neurotypical people. However, we all know that there is a variance between autistic people and neurotypical people. So it helps us to look at ourselves as an individual without feeling like we've got to sit in a box. Okay. And I think from my experiences in myself, from my experiences through my work, I have recognized that sometimes there is a difference within autistic people. So, and this is not limited to, and like I said, this is a holistic look. So you will know, and you will develop, if you don't know now, you will begin to develop your knowledge of how you are affected. So there may be different triggers or more triggers. So say, for example, I use this example in that, and it is relevant for the top two, is that, say, for example, being in a noisy room, a lot of people find it a bit like, oh God, this room's a bit noisy after a while. Or you see people, even when they go to nightclubs, taking time out. However, the impact of that noise on me is potentially greater than somebody who is neurotypical. I may not be able to manage with that noise at all, or only for a very short period of time, whereas they may be able to do that for a few hours through the night and then need to go out for a break. Okay. Similarly, you know, I do have different triggers, and that may mean that my triggers are more. So for example, for me, something I find really triggering, and we'll talk about, and I've used a lot of my own examples so that to personify it, but also so that you have a real life example, in that, you know, I hate the sound of nail clippers. You know, most people can clip their nails, not have an issue with the sound and move on from there. I don't like the feel. I absolutely cannot deal with the sound. You know, that is a very different trigger for a lot of people. Some people might be the same, some people might be different, but the way that, for me especially, the way that the sensory environment impacts on me definitely means that I have more triggers per se than a neurotypical person, or that the triggers that I experience happen more often in everyday life. Okay? You know, and like I alluded to, moving on to the second point, is it may drain coping energy more quickly. So lots of people have difficulty with smells. You know, for me, I cannot stand the smell of vinegar. That is like hit the floor, like that has taken a significant chunk of my coping energy away. The same with changes. You know, if something's happening and then it's like, okay, well, we're going to be half an hour late, and then actually, no, we're going to be 20 minutes early. Actually, no, we're going to be there at the original time. You know, again, for me, that can be more difficult that can have a bigger impact upon my coping energy. The next point, so interpreting coping energy can be difficult. So, you know, for a lot of people with autism, we can find it difficult to work out where we feel and what that means for us. And, you know, actually it's okay to be able to say, well, I'm feeling a little bit lower in my coping energy, and to not necessarily be able to interpret it straight away. That's fine. We can look back over that. And this is what coping energy gives us the ability to do, because sometimes, I know definitely for me, I would feel like I have to translate that into a way that somebody else can understand really easily. So like, and that may then make it difficult for that to be understood. So let's say, for example, I'm just feeling like I can't do that thing. I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you how I feel about it, but I just feel like right now I can't do it. And that for somebody else can be really difficult to understand. But if I can say, you know, because I don't understand it yet necessarily, and that's fine. But I can say, actually, my coping energy is a bit low, so I'm going to have to move that, and I'm going to have to do that tomorrow. You know, and that can be different. So then it's about, for me, I could then go back and think, okay, well, what happened earlier, and how has that impacted upon me? You know, it's easier to determine our coping energy for a lot of us than it is to attribute a specific emotion to something. Okay. And then lastly, as I'd said on the previous, you know, slide, is we may experience that state of chronic, like very low coping energy or no coping energy as a meltdown or a shutdown, which may be different to others, to neurotypical people. So we've spoken about it in theory, but what does it look like in everyday life? Okay, because you've heard about my experiences, you've heard about, you know, the way in which this works, and you're probably thinking, yeah, Hannah, that makes perfect sense. You know, coping energy is high, I can cope well. Coping energy is lower, I can't cope so well. But what does this look like in everyday life? Because I could tell you that anyway. Okay, so let's have a look. So let's look at this person. So this person today the line represents their coping energy, and the x-axis represents time. So the time is going along the bottom. So they wake up first thing in the morning. This person is not a morning person. So the act of getting up is quite draining on this individual's coping energy. They grab a coffee and they grab their favorite breakfast, and that really charges them up They've got their favorite work clothes on for the day. So again, that charges them up further. So that's where we're starting to see that peak that comes sort of between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. So they've been charged up there after they've had the trauma of waking up in the morning. They arrive at work and there's a big meeting in an hour, which they've completely forgotten about. They need to prepare quickly and they run around to find the right things. They hate being late. So that is a big issue for them. They find meetings really draining as well. So by lunchtime, which is 12 p.m. on this graph, their coping energy is pretty low. Okay. Lunch break, they go for a walk and they grab a familiar lunch. The fresh air really charges this person up and they finish their work day feeling all right. You know, they come out and they're feeling like, okay, I'm finished for work today, but I'm okay. On the way home, there is an accident. They drive a car. They have to go around the big diversion. There's lots of traffic. And by the time they get home, they're really looking forward to grabbing a shower and relaxing and having the leftover dinner from the meal that they made yesterday, although they haven't told anybody about this intention. They go to the fridge to get it and it isn't there. A member of the household has consumed it. We've all been there. By this point, they've got absolutely zero coping energy. This is post 6 o'clock. They get very seemingly angry and maybe upset. You know, everybody else cannot understand why they have got themselves or how they've got to an outsized reaction. And to be honest, neither can the individual. They haven't had the time to consider how their day is impacted on them. And they haven't done anything necessarily specific to change that. Although there are points in the day where they went for their walk, but maybe it's not been a conscious act. They've gone from one activity to the other to get them done. And I always think it's really important to think about, you know, that last activity. And I use it as an example because we've all been there. It's kind of funny, but it's also not funny when it happens to you. You know, it seems to everybody like a really outsized reaction. Everybody can get including the person who's had the reaction, can get really fixated on that last action, on that, like, well, what happened? And then this happened. And then there was they got upset. And then there was, you know, they felt overwhelmed. And there's a real focus on that, like, straw that broke the camel's back. If you understand what that saying means, that like very last thing that we put on that makes the whole system just kind of fall apart. When actually what we need to do is we need to sit back and reflect and go, personally, when I look at this, I think that after that work meeting, the walk was okay, but it didn't get them to the best place possible because they only, in this sort of example, had kind of half of their coping energy left for that day. You know, that person has walked through the door and they've not been in a very good position. Anything that drained them probably would have resulted in that response. And this is why coping energy is so important, because, and I use myself as an example, there was so many things that seemed to set me off. It was like beyond random. Like it just felt like I couldn't find the thing. It didn't seem to matter how many things I did and how many things I tried to put strategies in place for. It just felt like nothing worked, because actually it wasn't necessarily to do with that last event. It was all the events that had happened throughout the day. The last event had happened. I had no more coping energy left to deal with it. And then we went. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense so far. And this is one specific example. Okay. And any of these flows and any of that reaction, like this person's experience at the end, it's possible at any point of the day. It's possible in more than one point of the day. You know, we have to think about what drains our coping energy, and we have to look at what charges our coping energy and deploy activities and strategies when you begin to realize that your coping energy is lowering, or a situation happens and you know that lowers your coping energy. Okay, if I have to wash my hair, I'm going to have to do something either side of that activity, because I know that activity is a draining activity. And if I don't, I'm effectively choosing to be dysregulated by it. Okay, I know I have to do something about it. So a really important question is then, but how do I know where my coping energy is? And this is really important for us, because if we don't know where our coping energy is, we're unable what we need to do to support it. We're unable to know. We won't know what we need to do because we don't know where it is. If I'm sitting there thinking my coping energy is really high and I don't need to do anything, and it actually isn't, I'm not going to be able to support myself the best. And what's really important here to know is that this next section on like what I look like with my coping energy, that is what we call a working document. So it can change and you can add to it. It doesn't need to be fixed. As you go through this process, you may only start with one thing in each box. But as you begin to reflect and as you begin to think about it more often, you'll be like, actually, hey, yeah, when my coping energy is high, I'm really talkative. Actually, when my coping energy is lowering and it's kind of around the middle, it's harder for me to structure my sentences. Okay, so all of these things develop as we go, and you will begin to add to them. So don't look and think, oh gosh, I've only got one thing. You may not be able to find anything. I'd really want you to find at least one to start with, and that list will grow and develop as you engage with it. So these are some examples, okay, of what people feel like at different coping energy levels. Now I can feel your eyes rolling. Okay, I can feel them rolling already. You're seeing the thermometer down the side. You are not obliged whatsoever to use any thermometers in this process. Some of you may have used them when you were at school. Some of you may love them. Some of you may hate them. I do not mind how you feel about them. I've just used it for the purposes of this example to give a visual representation. But please stay with me. Please remain open-minded because you're doing great so far. So a high coping energy is us at our best. That is us, not at everybody else's best, where we feel like we are just walking on air. Like we are the best however we feel, okay? This is us communicating. And when I say effectively, I mean at our best. That's our personal best, We'll feel relaxed. We'll feel, that genuine, just feeling really good within ourselves. Low or no anxiety. We're going to be processing most efficiently for us. So most efficiently for us. And this is where it gets really specific, because what is effective communication to me may not be to you. I can talk and talk and talk, and I can talk and talk. But that my most effective communication is when I'm able to listen, pause, respond. Listen, pause, respond, and stop. That is my most effective communication. So how that looks is different. Maybe we're better able to try new things. That might be new food. That might be going to new places. It might be meeting new people. We're better open and willing to try those things when our coping energy is really high, because we're better able to deal with it. Because if it does drain our coping energy, we've still got a plentiful supply of coping energy left to be able to manage with whatever we're doing next. Generally, when we have high coping energy, we make better decisions. We make more informed decisions about what we are thinking about. We're maybe better able to look into the future and think, actually, no, this is going to happen in the future, so I need to think about what I'm going to do now. Generally here, with high coping energy, we're better at recognizing our own needs and planning to meet our own needs, okay? And again, I'm emphasizing that this is all within an individual's capability, okay? And it is individual. And finally, when we have a high coping energy, we are better able to implement strategies or to think about what strategies we need to be implemented for us, or even in the future. So, to be able to think, what am I doing this afternoon, and what do I need to implement there? So a more moderate coping energy. So when our coping energy is lowered slightly, here we might see communication not always becoming difficult, but more difficult than it was when we had high coping energy. We might be, using as, a semi-comfortable version. We're just starting to feel we're not feeling like walking on sunshine anymore. We're feeling like, okay, we're getting through, we're doing what we need to do. You know, you might find that as you go slightly closer to lower, then communication does start to become difficult. And again, the lower we go, the higher those levels of worry and anxiety. Around the moderate coping energy area as well, we might start to feel more avoidant and a little bit more rigid, because we are subconsciously aware that we don't have as much in the reserves to deal with things that might crop up. So what we're doing is we're avoiding the things that could pose us with some anxiety or some difficulty or some dysregulation. And that is where we are less likely to try new things, especially if we're reaching the lower end of that moderate coping energy. Because like I said, if we only have this much and trying new things takes this much, we only have a very, very short amount of coping energy left. Okay. When my coping energy is really high, I will try different foods. When it is not up high, not a chance. And that's me. That's me and my personal, you know, one of my personal things. But that can be different for everybody. That can be the difference between wearing socks and not wearing socks. It can be the difference between where you schedule your meetings or how efficient you are in those places, you know. Again, as we move into moderate, we generally might be feeling more irritable, more agitated, and more easily annoyed. And this will correlate as we continue to, you know, as we go down that scale. You might get that feeling of just general unease and potentially overwhelm starting to creep in. And you might have more difficulty processing and expressing emotion, and also might have a little bit more difficulty kind of going, okay, where am I? How am I feeling? Like, what's going on for me today, right here, right now? And some people may find that they are, and I've written oblivious to this stage, but what I mean by this is if we aren't yet aware of our coping energy and we haven't got well-established strategies to support ourselves and to support our levels of regulation, often we can feel overwhelmed or anxious or irritable or any of these things, or avoidant all the time. And that's often because we operate in a moderate to low coping energy all the time. So you may look at this high coping energy and go, Hannah, I don't experience that. Or it might be so long since you've experienced it, or it may be a very small amount of time, or a very small amount of time per year, per month, that you experience that. Because what can happen for some people is our coping energy never gets to that point because we don't yet know how to manage it. So this could be your normal, and therefore can be oblivious to some of those feelings that you may have that I've discussed above. You may look and go, oh yeah, that is just me all the time. But you may look and go, no, that is never me. And I want you to really think about that, because if you're looking and thinking, well, that's never me, then it could be you all the time. Or it could not be. And I know that might be difficult for some of us to get our heads around, but I just want you to look within yourself and consider, like, okay, when I'm going, how do I feel? Okay. And lastly, we've got low coping energy. So, you know, this is quite straightforward. Most people know, even if it's retrospectively, when they had really low coping energy or when they're at it. So meltdown, shutdown, distressed behavior, you know, feeling out of control, quite highly overwhelmed, difficulties with communication, if able to communicate at all, difficulties with processing, that really deep, difficult moment where you feel like, right, I'm just head's gone, like I can't. And that might be where we have this shouting, might be have crying, you know, whatever that is for you, that is what's going to happen then. Most people know this because it's quite a strong emotion, and we recognize it. It gives us a strong bodily sensation, a strong physical sensation. So often we remember it. And this is really important. This is really, really, really important. And if there's one top tip, hack, whatever you take away from this, it's this: that positive emotions do not always mean that coping energy is high. Does not always mean that coping energy is high. And this doesn't mean that I'm being a party pooper. Okay. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to, you know, be miserable. But what I'm saying is there are times when our emotions, we may lead by what we feel is the emotion. So, for example, I could go to Alton Towers and have the best day ever. I love Alton Towers. It's great. I love the ride, etc., etc. But it's noisy and it's busy and all these other things. So I can be happy within myself and smiling, but actually throughout the day, my coping energy is going down. That means that, you know, after and during, I have to do lots of things to keep my coping energy as high as I possibly can be. But if I just led by emotion, it can be like, well, she's had a great day, so I don't understand why now everything's gone wrong. And it's not because I wasn't happy, it's because my coping energy is lowered. You know, I'm not saying that when your coping energy is high, you won't feel great and you won't feel happy and you won't feel really positive. You very well may, but it's very important that we look at the two as separate as best that we can, because it will help you to have a better understanding of your coping energy and where you are in regulation stages. If any of you have got children, you will have 100% either said, or if you remember back to when you were a child, you will remember that when you were playing and it was getting a bit silly, and then somebody would always say, this is going to end in tears in a minute. And that is exactly what that kind of philosophy comes from, is that it's going to end in tears in a minute. Because regulation wise, we're being less able to regulate ourselves. So the final part of this session, if you're not convinced already, is to tell you some of the benefits of managing coping energy. Okay, so big first benefit is coping energy can be raised. So often in trainings, in informations, in pamphlets and leaflets, it's like, I've read like autistic people can get overwhelmed. You know, okay, now what? What do we do next? You know, coping energy can be raised. It's not fixed. It's not like, okay, well, it starts high and it goes low. It's not like a phone battery. You know, well, it is in a sense because you can charge it up at any point throughout the day. But that is the point. It doesn't need to get low for you to raise it up. It can get a little bit low and then a bit higher, and it can be high and then it can be low again and it can be high again. It can be raised, and we can do that proactively. We don't need to wait for the whole thing to come crashing down before we put something in place. We can look forward and say, okay, well, today I've got a meeting, so I need to do this thing first. Okay? We can be proactive. We don't need to wait until coping energy gets lower. And when we talk about how to manage coping energy in the next section, we're going to find out how we can do that. It helps us to create strategies. It helps us to recognize some of the areas where we don't actually have anything and we need to do something. Okay? My biggest and best thing about coping energy is it puts you first. It is specific to you. It asks you to think about you. It's all about you. It puts you first. Coping energy in itself is a really easy term, and it has a really easy language, you know, basis. You don't have to learn a theory. You don't have to learn about different zones. You don't have to learn about all this new terminology. It's just, my coping energy is really high today. My coping energy is really low today. My coping energy is in the middle. I need to charge my coping energy a little bit. You know, it's a very easy, understandable language. And you don't need to be a professional to understand it. You know, it enables you to try new tasks and new activities, or to re-engage in the things that you really want to, but you feel that there's a barrier for. You know, it helps us to break that cycle of overwhelm, that like, I'm just overwhelmed all the time. You know, I'm overwhelmed, okay, overwhelmed, okay, overwhelmed, okay. It helps us to break that cycle without it being like, how do I gain there? How do I get there? It makes it simple. It makes it simple. It supports us to develop our self-awareness so that we can know actually, and it gets us to think, like, it gets us to think about, actually, do I feel like this? Or is this just something that somebody told me I feel like? Where am I? What do I feel like I need to do? It puts you in that driving seat and it develops genuine levels of self-awareness. And I guarantee you that if you engage with this and you go through this practice and you feel this every day, it will have other impacts on your self-awareness over time. I guarantee you. There is never a day where I think I don't learn something about myself and how I operate. And that's like 2-3 years down the line. And finally, and I think this is my favorite thing, it helps you to feel more positive about the future. When you start to implement things and you walk away or you go to bed at night and think, gosh, like I actually managed that. I managed it really well. And I feel good in myself. I feel like I managed it in a regulated way. It's hard not to feel positive about the future. So with all that said, we're going to move on to the next stage and we're going to look specifically at how we manage coping energy. And we're going to do this in a step-by-step method. We're going to do this through several different activities and the resources for these will be provided through the platform. So the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to track coping energy. I want you to do this through journaling, and there is a template online as a part of this program. There will be a template that is made available to you. In this, we're going to think about what happened throughout the day and where your coping energy was. I want you to remember that there are no wrong answers. Okay, something happened and it affected you in however it affected you. That is absolutely fine. Okay, you can do this completely independently. It is completely possible to do it independently, but it is nice sometimes to get some support and ask others with you, you know, what did you think? What did you feel about my coping energy tonight, or et cetera, et cetera. And if you need support, please use the support that you have available to you. So this is an example of a journal. And in this context, there is a side that you don't have to use it if you don't want to. You could simply write like high, low, moderate, whatever. But I've used a little battery in this example. And that is what will be on the template for the journal. Okay. So it talks about the person waking up and didn't sleep well and where their coping energy was there, how they'd gotten ready for work early and quickly. So we're going to grab, you know, a Costa or a drink on the way to work. So their coping energy had gone up a little bit more. And then they lost their keys in the house. Coping energy had gone down a little bit, managed. And then it was them managing to do everything they needed to do in the morning, got to work, had a good time at work with their music on, and then went for a walk on their lunch break. So it shows that their coping energy is higher. So that is what I want you to do there for each day. And I would recommend doing this for a minimum of 14 days. I still do this every single day, 2 years on. Okay. But to start with, doing it every day for 2 weeks, it doesn't need to be as long as the writing on the left-hand side. It doesn't need to be that long. But, you know, it can be as long or as short as you need it to be so that you can understand it. And so what we're going to do from there, have a think about some of the things that drain our coping energy, because from journaling and from writing things down, you're going to start to see actually that when that happens, that affects me in this way, you know. And here is a list of all the triggers, all the things that drain my coping energy that I have found through journaling and through looking. I'm not going to read them all out, okay, but they are here. And I'm not saying that they would be the same for you. Some may be the same, some may not, but these are all the things that I've managed to pick out. And some of them have surprised me. You know, it's taken me 1 to 2 years to be able to identify lots of these things. Okay. And like I said, some of them have surprised me in many ways. What I've also done here is I've identified some charges. Okay. So I've been able to look at things that seem to bring my coping energy up. So for me, like outdoor walks, food, always food. I'm a big foodie. Feed me, give me a drink. I'm quite happy. Okay. And you know, it's, you know, these things here aren't a list of things for us to just avoid. You know, drainers aren't things that we avoid. It's about looking and thinking, okay, these are the things that I have a difficulty with, and I'm going to need to potentially pair them or sandwich them in between these charges. Okay. And something that is really important for me to say, and I cannot emphasize it enough, is that it doesn't need to be complicated or special. Okay, if you look up here, there aren't many things up here that I would say are really, really autism specific and have come from like this autism guru guide. Okay, a lot of these are just me. They are me and what makes me feel good. Okay, and sometimes if we go too specific down, right, I need autism specific strategies, we lose our individuality. That's who we are. Okay, and I encourage you to really be your individual self as you do this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to be yourself. Okay, sometimes the biggest challenge is actually acknowledging what charges us and making a space for it in our life. You know, not even in a sense of time, but accepting that that thing is important to us, irrelevant of what anybody else says or feels, and that you feel that you can need them and use them whenever you need to use them. Okay, it's a journey. You know, some people can do that instantly, and some people take a little bit more time. But fundamentally, it's all about you, and you need to make sure that you're doing things for yourself and not for other people. Okay, and lastly is developing a routine. So by journaling, it's going to help us to recognize some of the patterns in our day. And what we're going to see is that some patterns that we have are really good patterns, and other patterns that we have aren't so good. Okay, it's going to help us to identify places and times and strategies that are needed. It's going to help us to identify high coping energy periods. Okay, and it's also going to help us to identify not so high coping energy periods and times where we need to use strategies. You know, we want to have as much high coping energy as possible. Okay, and if we develop a routine that doesn't need to be fixed by like 6:01 do this, 5:05 do that, if we can develop some consistency and bring consistency to our coping energy, we don't have to think about it as much. We can think about it less. We can just do it. Okay, and it's not about going back and starting a whole new routine. It's looking at what you do and getting those charges in and bringing up that coping energy as much as we can. But we are going to cover routines in the next module, so please don't roll your eyes too much and think I'm not doing that yet. Listen to the module, hear it out, feel it out, see what is there for you before you make that decision. And I have, you know, a troubleshooting, you know, thing right here for you is trial and error. I can honestly say nothing I did just worked first time. Okay, and if it did, I didn't recognize that it did. So be open-minded. Try different strategies and try them at different times. You know, food is something that works well for me pretty much all the time. Okay, but that might be different for other people. Because ironically, when my coping energy is the lowest, I don't want food. I will not eat. I will not drink. I will not do anything. Okay, get used to and accept that this is a trial and error process, that we don't always get the answers to begin with. We do not always get the timing right straight away, but we continue to persist and we continue to try different places and different times until we're satisfied. And you know, obviously, if the strategy is triggering, then we'll stop. But generally, we all have an idea before whether something's going to help us or it's not going to help us. Okay, even if you've had a strategy in the past and it didn't work, now you've got a different knowledge and a different perspective on it yourself. You may be better able to implement it and reflect on it. If you need support from your support system, then ask for that. You know, explain what you have learned in this training. Explain that you might be trying new strategies. You know, I often do this with my family through email or text message so that they're aware of what is happening before I start doing things, so that they're better able to support me in the way that I need. Okay. So that is all for this module. If you have any questions, please write them down or note them down and bring them with you to the monthly hub sessions, where a member of staff will be able to support you to find answers to your questions. As more people go through this module, there will be frequently asked questions section, which you can access. And also feel free to ask any questions when there are times in the personal development, section of the hub. Reach out and use the contacts there to ask the questions that you need to ask. Thank you very much for listening. This has been created and presented by Hannah Harris of the Autistic Advantage for Autism East Midlands. And this is the end of Module 1. Thank you. Have a great day and bye.